Hi there, you're listening to Unnatural Selection, the show about newsy type stuff and things. My name is George.
My name is Tom.
And my name is Adam.
And with our powers combined, we are Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. And what a week that you have joined us on today, dear listener, because it is a week of terrible, horrible disappointments in every realm. Like some weeks are darker than others here on the Unnatural Selection podcast, but here we have reached the darkest week of the darkest timeline. And it's all right. Three white guys on a potty will sort it. We'll figure it all out.
Hey. Yep. We've got all the answers.
All the answers. Mm-hmm. So you get to pick your topic this week, guys. Mm-hmm. Choose your own adventure. You can pick the Forever War, which is the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Cool.
And three white guys can give our opinions about that without knowing a whole lot.
This week we've become geopolitics experts. I don't know if 100%. You know that. It's just like we took a quick crash course on Twitter, and now we know everything about the Israel-Palestine conflict.
And Twitter is never wrong.
Twitter is never wrong. Ask Gal Gadot.
Yeah. Twitter is never wrong, especially not this past week when the conflict has kicked up again. And Elon Musk's in charge of it now, and this information is right. I think more than normal.
Okay, so that's option one on the spinning wheel is Israel-Palestine. Great. What's option two?
Tom, how did you put it? You termed it fairly well.
Option two, we have the fallout of the voice referendum that occurred yesterday, and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander rights in Australia. Cool. I guess those are kind of the two big uns. Three, we've got New Zealand and their election yesterday as well. But I guess I argued before we started recording that three white guys can only achieve so much. We can only solve so much in our all-seeing, all-knowing power. So I vote we go with Aboriginal rights in Australia.
All right, let's go. Let's solve it. Let's do it.
Where our abilities are better spent.
We can't solve it because the voice referendum failed.
Oh, no.
Yes. No.
Now, I knew we were going to lose. I was looking at the polling, and I assumed that the voice...
You actually put in our rundown for today at 1 p.m. yesterday afternoon, placeholder for article about our unsuccessful voice referendum.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were right. Yeah, absolutely right.
Sometimes the polls are correct, and they were correct in this instance. The voice to Parliament referendum, which sought to add a clause about Indigenous recognition and a representative body that would make representations to Parliament on Indigenous issues made up of Indigenous people. Literally the most milquetoast, fucking banal kind of thing that you could ever possibly ask for. And it was unsuccessful. So resounding no, with none of the states voting yes, one territory being ACT voting yes, all the others voting no. And
as born and raised Canberran, I am very proud of my Canberran brethren.
Look, I will never talk shit about the ACT again. I mean, they were the one place. Granted, they don't count as a state for the purposes of the referendum, but it's still nice to see.
And neither does the Northern Territory, which was a huge irony in this kind of referendum as well, right? Like, I mean, there's a long history there of, backtracking. How the referendum would have had to have worked, which if this is news to anyone, especially after tomorrow, well, you probably should have known this before yesterday, but for a referendum to pass, that has to be a double majority rather than just the 51% kind of split for a general election. It has to be a majority nationwide amongst all eligible voters, but also a majority of the state have to also return a yes vote. So that is 4 out of 6, because we have 6 states in Australia and 2 territories, making 8 areas in total. So, yeah, and because of that language, whenever that rule was dressed up or whatever, the Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory, I guess, weren't a thing because, white Australia was very much, it was a group of colonies. first, right? So they were all those little colonies, and the territories came later. So yeah, so any vote in Northern Territory in the ACT only counted to that first benchmark of the national total, and the ACT returning a yes would not have counted to the yay or nay among the states count,
we lost
because they're not a state.
So
it was a resounding bollocking.
Yeah, so roughly
it was a 60-40 split.
60-40 in a time of hyperpolarization is a trouncing. Like, and especially
pretty good, to be honest.
40% of the country.
I was expecting it to be like 70-30, 80-20, something like that. So I think 60-40 is actually pretty good. But
no,
anyway.
That's insane. That would be no, what?
What do you mean? 60-40 in terms of 60, like you're only like 10%, or sorry, there's 20% difference, but like in terms of the shifting numbers.
Adam, the last election was, we're talking tens of thousands of votes and a handful of seats. Like, I don't know what makes you think that like a 60-40 loss is anything except an absolute dumping on the side. Like, someone has taken a skip, filled it up with manure, like Back to the Future style, and then dumped it all over us, Biff.
Nah. I don't worry about it as a total whitewash, but it is.
It was a wipeout. We got absolutely butt fucked in the bad way. Like I cannot express. Nobody even it's not an argument. You're infuriating. What does that mean?
It just means it wasn't that there's still 40% of the country that voted yes. Like, it's not a majority.
Missing a critical 10% that would make a majority.
Yeah, 10%. It's 1 out of 10. Look, what I'm saying is
so
it's not a complete...
4 out of 40% of the people that you walk up to will go, yeah, Aboriginals deserve to have a right to, have a say about the laws that affect them to Parliament. So more often than not, if you approach a random person somewhere in Australia, they would not be on your side. And you'd be like, that's pretty good.
I don't know. But obviously it was a clear no.
I knew it was going to be a loss. I didn't think it was going to be such a bollocking. I thought we'd at least get Victoria, maybe New South Wales. I was worried about Tasmania and Queensland, but I thought maybe South Australia. No, objectively, no.
And it's where and that's what makes it an interesting kind of election, especially with the double majority. I keep saying election, vote, like referendum, because of that double majority requirement. Where you'd think you're thinking maybe might flip Victoria or New South Wales, the two most populous areas,
right?
So they would be the hardest to get the majorities in. Almost. Whilst Tassie, I think I was reading some stats prior to the result, it was talking about that because of how the referendum sort of process works, one vote in Tasmania is worth 14 New South Welshmen. So like that, there's that balance as well. So that's how it kind of really flips some power in those ways. Like, while it doesn't have to be every state unanimously, but so it's very kind of weird in that way. But flipping, like, I think they also had said that no referendum has passed without at least Victoria or New South Wales being a positive result. So there was that as well. It just...
And no referendum has ever passed without both sides of Parliament getting on board. So there's been a lot of
the bipartisan aspect of
critique of, Peter Dutton and Jacinta Price critiquing Anthony Albanese, saying, it's his fault, basically. You got to love the people that have spent the last year bringing down the voice to Parliament, then turning around and going, it's Anthony Albanese's fault that the vote didn't get up. It's like, well, it would have been a lot easier if it was bipartisan. Can't believe all this divisive rhetoric coming from looks around, checks notes, myself, dividing the country.
Yeah. There's just so much kind of, them to be bringing them down for ages and then to be like, look, this.
Yeah. Can you believe Anthony Albanese fucked this? It's like blaming the guy from
yourself.
What's the guy for Freddy Krueger? He's going like, I can't believe this. It's Freddy Krueger guys. Responsible. It's like, Well, it's like saying the victims rather are responsible for the murders. It's like, can't believe all these people keep getting stabbed by Freddy Krueger. It's some of them are going to take responsibility for it. Like,
look, Johnny Depp, if you didn't want to get killed by gardening shears,
shouldn't have gone to sleep. Shouldn't have gone to sleep, buddy.
Shouldn't have gone to sleep.
Then you wouldn't have gotten ate by a couch.
Before we jump too much more into the whys and hows of we got here, the other interesting thing with the stats, I guess, of who voted what is that it was the people that voted yes were basically the coastal scum breeding wankers that we are.
There was a direct relationship between your level of education, your level of wealth, your proximity to the CBD, and your age. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're young, live in the inner city, educated, earn a decent amount of money, you voted yes. And if you're not those things, you didn't. So what one thing that was reassuring to me about looking at all these statistics was seeing that the places that voted teal independent seats in the last election were majority in favor of yes. So those inner city Sydney seats, the blue ribbon Liberal seats, same in Melbourne, they all voted for the yes campaign. So I think if we're using this referendum as a bellwether to say what's Peter Dutton's chances at the next election, well, it actually doesn't look too promising for him, because they need to pick up those blue ribbon Liberal seats again if they actually ever want to form government. So it's like, yes, you've won, quote unquote, the no campaign, in terms of using the referendum as an opportunity to bash Albanese. But I don't think it makes anyone, well, at least not from none of the polling I've seen, does it actually make the populace consider Peter Dutton as a viable leader or like him any better? Like, they were looking very smug. They were looking very smug, Jacinta Price and Peter Dutton there going, it's the referendum we never should have had. But at the end of the day, it's like, you've got a victory under your belt, but what has it actually gotten you other than dragging the country through this horrible, ordeal for the last year? Like, what did we win? Tell us what we won, Peter.
What's the political gain that you've kind of gotten there?
Status quo.
The back to the electorates. So the other thing being, that's why this is important, is that it's also the same sort of spread that they had in 1999 with the Republic referendum.
I found that so interesting. That it was almost an exact copy. Like there was some electoral flips, but that the spectrum of overwhelming yes to overwhelming no was essentially the same, which is wild given they were, I guess, two very different, 24 years apart and very different issues. Although you would think that people who were against us ditching the monarchy are probably also against giving First Nations people anything. So,
well, I mean, there's probably there could be a correlation there. I think on that as well, like, so when we talk about these blue ribbons, we're talking about eastern states as well. Western Australia was like, that was pretty severe. That was like, I think 25 to 75 or 30 to 70, I think, %, which means that, even seats in Perth were voting no. So, as we said, Northern Territory, which has the highest proportion of Indigenous people, came out no overall. So, I guess my point being is this actually, and the fact that it's happened now twice, I think this raises a larger question about politics in this country. And look, the same thing happens in the US. You see a US election, which is kind of a referendum on how progressive or conservative you are. You can see in the US elections where there are, around the cities, it's all blue. And then as soon as you get out into the wider regional areas, it just turns red. And the same thing effectively happened here with this referendum. Interestingly, though, when you have an election here in Australia, it's not always the case. So, bigger regional seats can still vote Labor, for instance, here in Australia, which I think is an interesting difference, right? And I think what it shows is that I just think it shows a little bit like and people have been saying this, that Canberra needs to do more to bring regional and rural areas along on the journey. at the moment there is a disconnect between those communities and the people that are making the rules in Canberra. And people have often say that very cynically, like, fuck the people, fuck the pollies and all this kind of stuff. But it's clear that that's kind of what's happened in this case. And I think it raises a larger question about investment in those areas. Like if the people out in the middle of nowhere, or even if you're on the outer urban fringe, if you can't see how government's working for you, or if you don't understand it or whatever else, then, maybe the government in general is doing something wrong.
Is that government's fault though, or is that just a function of a larger disconnection that people have with centers of authority? Like, I think since the pandemic, there's been a real pushback against expertise, against, authority, against any kind of, this whole sovereign citizen, this whole fever dream of the UN coming and taking people's land, and they're going to take your backyards if you get the voice. Like, I don't think any of that rhetoric really would have flown during the referendum 24 years ago. So clearly there's this...
I think it's moved. I think that the paradigm has shifted.
There's this strain of anti-authoritarian, anti-expertise, institutional, anti-intellectualism. And I don't know that that's necessarily the fault of Canberra or politicians to bring people in. I think it's just... there's just a section of our electorate that are hanging out on Facebook and self-radicalizing and making, diving further down the hole of hyper-partisanship. And that's got nothing to do with Canberra. Like, that's just people indoctrinating themselves.
But that's not everyone. Like, there is a lot of, older people that probably wouldn't even use.
I heard the term New World Order more in the last 3 weeks than I have in the last 3 years. Okay, so...
yeah. I mean, there's definitely some of that. I'm just, my point being is the fact that this has happened twice now with the same sort of spread shows that there is a disconnect there. And I think, you're right. It has gotten worse. It's definitely gotten worse over the last however many years. Like, you can see that in the media and the way things are polarizing globally in Western societies, not just here in Australia.
Yeah.
But the fact is, if you're doing a referendum and you're on the Yes campaign, maybe you need to think about that. Maybe you need to look at the result from 20 years and go, what are the key issues here in terms of people actually coming along for the ride?
Touring, like Noel Pearson and other Yes campaigners talked about going to remote communities and, being on the planes, being on buses, going out there, like talking to people, being basically remote for the last year, going out to these, rural communities and talking to them about these issues. So I don't know that that's necessary. I think it's, as you say, it is a phenomena that we've observed elsewhere in the Western world. So I don't think it's something that's unique to Australia. I think this is just the case
we've got to do something about it, though. Like, you can't just let it sit there and go, oh, well, that's the way it is.
But I guess what I'm saying is it's not necessarily anyone's fault of like, oh, Canberra doesn't, care enough or get out there. It's like, well, any time that Canberra reaches out with some sort of initiative, people go, it's the New World Order. It's the UN coming to take my backyard. Like,
I don't think it's even as extreme as that. I think in Australia, we just have a real sort of disconnect with authority when it comes to regional and rural areas. And like, I know that, like,
disconnect with authority. Is that code for a bunch of racist fucks, or?
No, I
definitely think racism was a big part of it.
I mean that's. Yeah, I don't know so much about it, but there's part of it.
Well, and that's what I was thinking about when reading. I think Adam, you and I might have been reading the same thing with like the breakdown of the demographics and the locations and all in the ABC. But that was something I was thinking about it because George touched on it earlier. That they were saying depending on your income or the percentage of your electorate's population who has an education beyond high school and et cetera. But I know, I can think of a ton of people who, I guess in my circles, so it's a very, small bubble, like statistically, but like a ton of like young, poor people who really cared about the issue. So I thought it was interesting that it was like the wealthier are the ones voting yes and the people on less are voting no. It's like, have you met anyone in Brunswick? Like, have you met like all the artist hippies who are all
but when they talk about wealth, they're talking about wealth in relative sense. Like the poorest person in Brunswick is still probably richer than someone in a remote community somewhere living off fuck
10
all,
million
right?
percent.
You know, so
But like,
probably more.
wealth is a relative sort of term. There.
Yeah, I just thought it was a weird kind of way that they were splitting it. But then also that there was no discussion in these sorts of breakdowns, I guess because the stats, it's hard to have the statistics inform it. But yeah, just again, how comfortably racist Australia is.
And how happy we are to buy into a massive disinformation campaign. That's the other thing that's changed in the last 20, 30 years is that the media, largely because of Rupert Murdoch, has become so brittle that they are unable to respond to the fire hose of information that's being generated on social media. Basically, it's become, now that Murdoch more or less controls most of the media in this country, and there's a floodgate of misinformation opening up on social media, mainstream media is no longer the gatekeeper of the information. They're actually more of a funnel of the misinformation through to the masses. It's like something gets a bunch of retweets, gets a lot of traction, gets picked up by The Australian, gets picked up by news.com.au, gets picked up by the Herald Sun. That becomes a pipeline for that brainworm, I don't even want to call it misinformation. It's disinformation. It's been a deliberate campaign of lying to influence voters and how they're going to vote in this referendum. And then the mainstream media, rather than being gatekeepers and seeing that information and heading off at the pass, goes, oh, well, this will get a bunch of clicks. Let's publish it.
Well, it's suddenly, rather than it being, only sort of reporting on the information that they themselves have vetted or whatever.
Now it just becomes a hypodermic needle from social media, just injecting it straight into the brains of their consumers.
My point is that the news is then that this is being talked about a lot.
Oh, it's being talked about. There's lots of retweets, so it must be worth talking about because so-and-so dickfuck69 on Twitter says there's a New World Order conspiracy. And then outlets, even like the ABC, will then go, is there a New World Order conspiracy? Let's talk about it. And then in the article, they go, no, of course not, dummy. There's not a New World Order conspiracy. But all anyone ever saw was the headline. It's like, oh, fuck, the ABC's talking about it. Maybe a New World Order is something I need to be talking about. Maybe it is real, like I keep hearing about it. We've got OG Butt Stuff writing in. Excellent. Amazing name. So
wow, that's going in the username Hall of Fame that we have.
It's not. Right. Twitter is a good place for information or inspiration for research on said subject. It can be. Twitter used to be a good place for information, depending on who you follow. If you follow smart, educated, thoughtful people on Twitter, you can get great information. There's definitely stuff in years past that has been surfaced to me because I was on Twitter that I wouldn't otherwise have come across in just my regular reading. But I think Twitter of late has, especially under Elon Musk, as you said, Adam, has become just an absolute, like...
I didn't say that. You said that.
Tom said it, sorry.
Tom said that.
Yeah. I know Adam and I look really alike and
all right.
Like brothers and stuff all the time.
It's just become this sort of wretched hive of scum and villainy. Like it's not the place that it used to be because all the far right voices are being amplified in a way that they never were before. OG Butt Stuff says the World Economic Forum is not a conspiracy; it's visible. Yeah, this is one of those things where you had me at hello, OG Butt Stuff, and I'm so disappointed to find you on the wrong side of this, but especially considering how glorious your username is. There's so many examples of people like pointing at the UN or pointing at the World Economic Forum or pointing at various multilateral organizations and going, look, it's a multilateral organization. It must be a Soviet takeover. And it's like, no, you're just describing multilateral organizations. Like
you're describing capitalism.
You're just, you're describing governments cooperating with each other to achieve things that are mutually beneficial for those things. Like world government is not, the phrase world government completely misunderstands what the objective of multilateral organizations is. It's not to have one person sitting at the top controlling everything. It's to collaborate on issues together and ensure that the world works in a way that is more cohesive and more conducive to trade. And yes, Tom, capitalism. There used to be this laugh line that no country that had a McDonald's has ever been invaded, right? So until Russia invaded Ukraine just recently. And the reason that was the case is because the thinking has been the more we establish diplomatic and economic ties with other countries, the more people's profit motive would prevent them from going to war with other different kinds of countries. Like if we're both invested in a mutually beneficial outcome and we go to war, both of us lose money and no one wants that. So that's been the thinking. But like that's not like evidence of some conspiracy. You're just describing what
it's the antithesis
multilateral organizations are. Like
it's the antithesis of feudalism and that medieval sort of warlords mentality. It's eventually
that's the alternative.
But probably more back to the voice. I think it's interesting.
I did it. It just did it to me. They incepted my own brain, and now I'm talking about the fucking New World Order. You see what I mean?
Stop saying it. God damn it. I know. To be fair, I think like most of the people that voted no would not have even really thought about that. I just think that is as we discussed, it's something that's been blown up out of proportion because people are like, oh, they're talking about it. But
I see people posting on Facebook. I see people, people that my mother-in-law knows on her Facebook spreading and sharing and resharing, But
part of that's the algorithm. You're seeing that because that's
part of it's the algorithm,
your network.
But people are pushing.
You're seeing that because you're a conspiratorial piece of shit.
People are pushing the algorithm, right? The algorithm that isn't just like some passive, hello, I'm the algorithm just sitting in the corner like, it's just me, Bobby Algorithm. Well, I've decided what you're going to see today. Someone is behind what is being pushed. Shut up, let me talk. It is a deliberate agenda that is being pushed. Okay, there are certain people that benefit from the narrative that is being pushed. Someone is on the other end of that story pushing the share button. And how it gets shared and the mechanics and the plumbing of how that works, yes, that's the algorithm, that's social media. But there are a portion of people in our society that are wanting to proliferate deliberate disinformation, okay? And you can't just push that aside and go, it's the algorithm, it just makes everyone crazy.
No, but what I'm saying is not everyone is glued to social media like we are, is my point. You can't say that it's that the reason why everyone voted no is just because of disinformation.
No, I'm not
there
saying,
are other reasons.
I'm not saying that's the only reason, but that is one, I think a not insubstantial amount of people have had their brains poisoned by disinformation, which is a deliberate campaign, okay? There are Advance Australia, there are organizations that have money that are pushing deliberate disinformation, right? And I'm not saying everyone's on social media, because if it was just on social media, it wouldn't reach everyone. But what happens is the pipeline of information that I talked about before. You get a video on social media, that video gets shared a bunch of times, like the Neighbours star that we talked about last week. That video gets shared a bunch of times. The fact that it's being shared a bunch of times therefore makes it newsworthy, and then it feeds in through the legitimate mainstream media pipeline into people's feeds. And then the ABC writes an article going, oh, isn't it crazy? This misinformation got shared 20,000 times. And then a bunch of normies look at it and go, that's weird. Let me look at this video that they've linked in the article. You know what I mean? Like it is
they've made some compelling points.
A pipeline of misinformation that becomes legitimized by its contact with the mainstream media. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but yes, that is a thing. But I don't.
It's not the only reason there was a progressive no. There was other reasons that people were voting no, all of which I think are equally as poorly informed. Like if you've got a bunch of Nazis going out and being on one particular side of an issue, I wouldn't be caught dead on the same side as a Nazi on any fucking issue whatsoever. Generally, the way I know that I'm doing the right thing is by being on the opposite side of a Nazi. But apparently there are some people that happily, vote alongside Nazis because they want to, the voice is not progressive enough. And so we're going to like Briggsy said, we're going to reconvene at some undisclosed point in the future to do something that is progressive enough. We haven't decided what or when. And it's like, yeah, that's the plan. Okay, great. Good luck. Yep. Good luck with good luck with your treaty. I'm sure I'm sure Lydia Thorpe, I'm sure Jacinta Price, I'm sure Warren Mundine, they're going to get together and they're going to come up with a treaty. They're going to solve all these issues and close the gap in the next year. I can't wait to hear all the fucking ideas that they're going to have in the next 6 months, because it's just going to be absolutely popping. Everyone's so fucking excited about all these things we're going to bring to Aboriginal communities now that the voice has been voted down. I can't wait. It's going to be a new golden age. No, of course, nothing's going to happen. This issue is going to disappear from the headlines in 2 weeks. And guess who's not getting a treaty? Guess who's not getting the gap closed? Guess who's not getting any fucking additional attention to solve any of these issues? It's the Indigenous community, right? So you can vote progressive no or non-progressive no, but the answer is still no. It means nothing fucking happens.
Yeah, and that was sort of the feeling that I was having last night, where I was just like, fuck, I can't think of anything else to say other than just, this fucking sucks. It's just going to continue to be awful for these Indigenous communities, as I think we'll probably talk about in a minute, how that's been brought up again in a bad sense. But yeah, it's still going to be really poor and awful for them. And it, like, fuck, this was step one of the statement from the heart. Right?
This was step one. If we can't even do this modest, incredibly modest proposal, you know, Jacinta Price couldn't even help herself in her victory speech, got up and lied again. It's like, I don't even know what the point is of lying at this point. You've already won. You already got what you wanted. But whatever. She gets up and she says, there was nothing in the wording about advice or advisory body, like trying to say that there was something sinister about that. And I looked at it and I was like, may make representations to the parliament. And I was like, okay, so the word advisory body isn't in there specifically, but you understand to make representations is to give advice. Like, you understand what a synonym is, don't you? Like, a synonym is a word that is like a word, but isn't that exact word, you fucking pedant. It couldn't help herself, just reflexively lies.
Yeah, and that's where you run it by your constitutional lawyers, which they did.
Yeah, and 70 of them came back and said,
yep,
all good.
Yep, that was all good. That's exactly what it is. Like, what you think it is what it is. But yeah, like, I feel literally I've seen a lot of people coming out after this and talking about, you know, that it's a disappointing result, but obviously, you know, the fight's not over, blah blah blah, and that, you know, there's still hope, still pushing, like no one's giving up, which is great. And when they come forth with what they propose as a treaty, if they do one and all that, I'll support that 100%. But yeah, it just kind of sucks that this was stage one of what was meant to be sort of like, hey, the way that we ease our way down the path of reconciliation. And step one was just the small concession of saying, hey, it's just a mandate to listen to them. Didn't have to do what they said. Didn't have to give them anything, didn't have to concede anything like that. It was just, you just had to listen if you were doing something that would affect them.
It costs you nothing. No thanks.
And that wasn't compelling enough for what we saw in the stats.
Yeah.
If that's not fucking compelling enough, it just gives me such
I think people
for our country.
We're actually pretty conservative, I think, as a country, to be honest, Tom.
10 million % for like the larrikin attitude that we all tout as Australia being like, oh, we're a bunch of larrikin convicts, like crime, criminal rule breakers who like
Underbelly.
We're all like great and rad
Ned
and
Kelly.
larrikin-y, but fuck, we love a law and order story of police beating up people in the streets, don't we? Such larrikins. Like, we are a bunch of conservative shitlords.
I think, when I say conservative, I think that we are physically, we don't like change is kind of the way I would put it.
No.
I think one thing I found from listening to, I guess, that sort of ecosphere that George was talking about in terms of the information space and the stuff and the messaging getting regurgitated around was that there was a fear that people would be adversely affected and that somehow the fear
is unsubstantiated. That's my point.
Well, Well, this is the point. The point being is that they thought that we'd do this, and then they would want a treaty, and then they would want in that treaty they would want to have land reparations and other things.
Which is where all the backyard Aboriginals are going to steal your backyard and all this sort of stuff, which is nonsense.
But also people don't. By the sounds of it, a lot of people didn't want a treaty. And which is interesting because we're all for, like us three, we talk about treaty as being a good model, being it's worked in other places. But by the sounds of it, a lot of voters think that is a terrible idea.
They don't even want to hear about it. Australians are like, I don't know, that sounds confusing. I'm going to vote no. Like, there's just a bunch of people out there. And there were articles, from people saying, just like Dazza from fucking Maribyrnong with a hat on diagonally, being like, I don't know what it was about, so I voted no, hey. They're like... It's like, spend 5 minutes Googling it. If you make a bechamel sauce, you spend 5 minutes fucking Googling it before you make it, right? Like, how did you not spend a few minutes trying to understand what this was before you jumped into the polling booth? Like, how
this
possible?
Is what I mean about a disconnect between certain areas.
But it's not a disconnect where it's like, Canberra didn't try hard enough.
There's not a care factor.
There are people that don't want to know. That's my point.
Yeah, they don't care.
There's a disinformation pipeline. There's a bunch of people lying and acting cynically in their own best interests. And there's a completely disengaged populace that doesn't want to find out. I read this book called The Voice to Parliament Handbook, right? It's like a 2.5 hour book written by Kerry O'Brien.
Kerry O'Brien, right?
And
I forget the other
another
person.
co-author. But basically talking about the voice to Parliament, talking about the Constitution. Here's how we've altered the Constitution in the past. Here's the arguments for having the Indigenous voice to Parliament included as part of the Constitution, like why you would want to do that rather than just legislating it. And it goes through the arguments. And it's really not overly partisan. It's an informative document, and I encourage anyone to listen to it. It's free.
And how many people read that?
Fuck all.
How many people looked at the design principles online?
And what I did was I posted it on Twitter. I shared a link of it. I said, hey, there's this free book. Go listen to it. I think it lays out the argument. Like, it makes complete sense to me. Like, have a listen. And then I got a guy who tweeted at me being like, no, fuck you, lib. I was like, fuck you, you dirty lefty, basically. And I was like, but how is that? You spent the time to go looking through hashtags on Ozpol or Voice to Parliament and like shit posting and replying to people's things, but you didn't spend the 2 minutes that it would actually take to do the research to find out what exactly it is you have to vote on it, right? It's a legal requirement that if you are enrolled to vote, you have to vote in a referendum. So given that you have to go and vote, don't you want to know what it is you're voting on? Like, it just seems crazy to me that you've got the time to go and shitpost on Twitter and call people pricks. And, I posted about the ACT yesterday. So I'm never going to say anything bad about the ACT. And some prick on Twitter is like, Australian communist territory. Like, it starts having a go. It's just like, why? If you spent the time arguing with people and you just use that same amount of time in terms of looking at it and reading it for yourself and understanding what the proposition is, I don't think we would be in this position, but people in Australia are proudly ignorant. They do not want to know. So it's not a matter of like, the politicians didn't communicate well enough. They weren't persuasive enough. It's like, you cannot persuade someone who doesn't want to be persuaded, who likes things how they are, and because of their privilege, doesn't have to care, doesn't have to live in a world where their decisions will have an impact on the quality of their lives, or whether they're going to get rheumatic heart disease or whether they're going to get any other number of dead diseases that don't affect people in metropolitan centres, but affect, Aboriginal people in rural settings because of their lack of resources and hygiene and things like that are available to them. You don't have to think about it. So you don't.
You just don't.
Yeah. Which is why I think we are conservative, because
as a country,
part of being conservative as a country is that you are disengaged.
You can afford to be disengaged because your life doesn't change.
Yeah. I guess I was going to say that, it's an interesting point where you say, well, the Yes campaign didn't do enough, but like, could they have done enough if most people weren't engaged? It's an interesting, I guess, proposition.
whether it's a losing battle or not.
Yeah, like, are you just bashing your hands to brick wall? It's one of those things where it's like you almost need to, like, create an issue and directly correlate it somehow back to people's experiences. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting point where,
I worry that our information space has become too polluted for us to be able to have sensible discussions about this sort of stuff. I think Twitter is not the cause, or social media is not the cause, but it is an accelerant. And I think it has
petrol on the fire.
Yeah, it has really poisoned the debate for anything to happen. And if we wanted to have a referendum and have it in good faith, there's things that the government could have done in advance to help lay the groundwork, like accepting Allegra Spender's bill on their truth in political advertising. But both major parties didn't want a bar of that because they're like, no, we want to be able to lie during election cycles because it behooves us.
Yeah, you mean we have to tell the truth?
That sounds like some bullshit. We could address the influx of dark money into our political system and our donation laws. And there's things that we could have done in advance of a referendum to say, hey, we are going to try and cleanse the body politic of this poison of misinformation and disinformation. And we chose not to do it. And then when Peter Dutton announced that the Liberal Party wasn't going to be joining in and it was a single party referendum, which has never gotten up, it put Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party in a very awkward position because then they were then forced to go, okay, well, what do we do? We've run on this. We've said we're going to do it. If we take it off the table now, we're going to look like hypocrites. We're going to get hit on that. If we follow this referendum through and it doesn't get through, we're going to get hammered. Like Peter Dutton's perfectly, say what you want about Peter Dutton. I think the man's a monster, but he is very incisive in where he sees political wedge points. Okay, as a divisive politician, he knows how to get in there and split, the center from the left in order to try and be able to get what he wants out of the situation. And that's exactly what happened. He's gone, okay, well, I won't pay a massive political price for opposing this, but Labor will pay a price for losing this referendum. And so I'm going to happily split, because as soon as it's not bipartisan, there's no historical precedent for a referendum getting up under those conditions. So, so it's not Anthony Albanese that's to blame, as in all the commentary. Albo should have done this. Albo shouldn't have done that. It's like, well, it's pretty rich for everyone to be blaming Albo when they're the ones, when Dutton and Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine are the ones who just spent the last year campaigning against this, and then it fails, and then they go, Albanese's a bit divisive, isn't he? It's like, you're the one who's been dividing us. What are you talking about?
It's a clever,
you should have been able to fob us off.
I do think, though, I think part of this disengagement, part of the polluted information sphere, part of the issue with this referendum was that we were trying to probably do something that was a little bit too complicated for that space. And what I mean by that is we're trying to amend the Constitution to create the framework or the legal boundaries to have a body that will vote about in the future. There's like three steps.
Too many steps. Yeah.
There's too many steps. And all you need, as you've just pointed out, is seeds of doubt here or there. Pop it in, and just keep hitting. And all they use the same match. There's not enough information. There's a lack of detail. It's divisive. Yeah. Bang, 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 bang. You just keep hitting them with that. And that cuts through much more than, well, step one is to we'll get the wording all agreed upon, and then we'll amend the Constitution. But that's because it's so much easier to sow doubt than it is to actually build something up, right? Like that 100%. That is the advantage of negative partisanship. Same thing under Tony Abbott, right? All he would do is attack. When it was his turn in government and he actually had to build something, he was fucking woeful at it because there are two different skill sets, right? It's easy to tear something down, much harder to build something up from scratch and have it weather against those attacks. So we've got OG butt stuff still hanging in there, OG butt stuff. So where should people get said valid information? Where do you get your information from? Who's actually telling the whole truth? I'm not saying that we've got a solution to having a shared epistemology with the rest of Australia, but starting with credible news sources who have been around for a long time, evaluating, legally obliged to say things correctly,
right? A publisher, not just some random cunt on Twitter. Start there, and not publications like the Grey Zone or whatever. You look at the person, okay? The person who's writing the article. Number one, is it a reputable publication? that's been around for a long time.
Journalists.
Are they a qualified journalist? Who are they? Where do they come from? Where did they study? What's their expertise? When you see a byline who's someone that you don't recognize, spend 3 seconds Googling them to see if they're just some random lunatic who says that demons, that mental illness is the cause of demons having sex with you in your sleep. Or are they a real doctor who's got real doctor things? Okay, like you can have some kind of verification in the information space by placing some faith in authorities. And I'm not saying that every authority, every place, is necessarily worthy of our love and attention, affection. But you look at sources from the left, you look at sources from the right, and then you come to some kind of sensible conclusion using your own brain. Now, I understand that this is a lot of work, but it's worth it when it's just a little old thing called democracy at stake. It's worth doing a little bit of power Googling.
Yeah, indeed.
So OG Butt Stuff is asking for specific publications. I actually don't think it's useful to talk about specific publications. I think what's useful is to form a skill set so that when you are out in the world, you can determine what is a legitimate publication, what is not, because publications change. Okay. Like news.com.au, when we were growing up, was actually less clickbaity. I think it was more of I considered it to be more of a reputable publication than it is now. It's about forming a critical framework, a skill set to where you can come to a publication that maybe you've never seen before and then apply these rules to see how worthwhile a perspective is. It's like it's a constantly shifting. So yeah. I listen to news sources on the left, right? I listen to The Guardian or read The Guardian, the ABC, but I also listen to sources on the right, but I'm not going to listen to The Blaze, right? I'm not going to listen to The Drudge Report. There are places that I know are not good, or what was that? Breitbart.
The Daily Mail.
There are places that are not worth listening to. So I'll listen to sources on the right, but they're credible sources like The Economist or, whatever, Wall Street Journal, where they are right, of politics publications, but they are within a epistemological framework, right? They're within the what's the name of the window? The
Overton window.
They're within the Overton window, right? There's differences on the left side. We want to make taxes higher. There's difference on the right side. We want to make taxes lower. And then there's like Donald Trump is actually still the rightful president of the United States. It's like, okay, well, I just have to discount that. That's not part of the Overton window of rational, political discourse anymore. Yeah. Like you're too far off. So you sort of look at both sides and you even it out. You look at it and you use your critical faculties. Like it's an ongoing dialogue with truth and it requires effort and input. And most people are unwilling to do that.
Yeah.
Moving back to The Voice, do we think that if the government, rather than just having design principles, if they had come forward with an actual framework, a model, that would have swung the debate? Tom first. I want Tom's opinion first.
All right,
fine. You see, I'm in two minds about that because I think on the one hand, sure, if you're coming with a model, then the whole there's no detail argument wouldn't have worked because here I am with all this detail, even though there was a shit ton of detail, humour me here.
There was a whole constitutional convention in putting together the voice to parliament system. But
if they're coming with a model to be like, well, this is exactly how it's going to work. You're wanting those details. This is fucking those details. But of course, of those details, I think there would have been a litany of things that they would have picked up give them a fire hose of shit to bury it anyway. So it's just like, I think you would have the same, from the situation we've been talking about of that, without bipartisan support, and if they are determined to have just been against this to score political points or to humiliate their opponents or for whatever reason, they would have found a mechanism to do that, whether they came with a model or not.
I agree. The point was to tear it down. So when we look at the Republic referendum in October of 99...
Because they had a model, right?
They had a model, and that was one of the reasons that it got that it was unsuccessful because when you look at polling
like the model.
in terms of the majority, did the majority of Australians at that time favour a republic over a monarchy? Yes, they did, but the republic didn't get up, and here's why. The wording was to alter the constitution to establish the Commonwealth of Australia as a republic, with the Queen and Governor-General being replaced by a president appointed by a 2/3 majority of the members of the Commonwealth Parliament. That is a very long run-on sentence, and what happened is John Howard didn't want the referendum to get up, but he thought, okay, well, I'll put the detail in there, and then the people who are for a 2/3 majority will go, yeah, that sounds good, and then the people who are for a republic but against that particular model are going to look at that and go, well, that's not exactly the republic that I would want, so I'm going to vote against it. And that's what's called wedge politics. You know, finding the thing that unites your side of politics and splits the other side of politics. And so, yeah, of course, the referendum didn't get up. It was 45% in the affirmative on that one in the end, and it wasn't carried. So more detail absolutely would not have sated. You know, more detail was just, it's a talking point, because if we'd given them more detail, then they would have critiqued the model, and then it would have all been about the model and how the model is imperfect and how the model doesn't work. So
it would have. I feel like it would have shifted the conversation though a little bit.
The debate was not happening in good faith in the first place. It wasn't like we all just want the best for Indigenous people, right? That really wasn't the debate that we were having. You know, when you see
there was a lot of that being said.
Oh, being said, but it's not the case. When you have far right members, you know, people who are noted neo-Nazis, looking at statements from Lydia Thorpe and liking them on Instagram, saying she thought it was disgusting that 97% of Australians would have a say in deciding issues about the Indigenous community, who are only 3%, and saying it was disgusting, saying the referendum was genocide. And then you have members of the far right liking that post. They're not doing it because they care about Indigenous issues. They're doing it because it's a way of digging into the lefties and having a go at them, right? Like, it's just like, oh, someone's on my side, I'm going to support what they say, even if, because it's not a good faith discussion is my point. It's not about seriously debating the issues in a serious way. It's about dinging the other side. And they act like they care about the Indigenous community when the fact is they couldn't give a fuck. The Liberal Party could not give a single fuck about the Indigenous community, and we'll know because all of these plans, you know, the treaty and stuff. I was making a joke earlier. I can't wait to see all these plans from the Liberal Party to help Indigenous communities, because they're not going to materialize. 2 weeks from now, this will be off the front page, and Jacinta Price will have served her purpose, and she'll disappear, and we'll never see her again, because it was never about that. It was just about dinging Labor. It was about dinging the other side, about using it as a weapon against your political enemies. They don't give a fuck.
What about, in terms of where we go from here, in terms of organisations like Advance Australia, in terms of the coalition and what they look at next? Like, what do we think they do next? Like, what's their next?
Oh, Jacinta Price has already said they're going after the trans community next. She's already said that.
Wait, really?
That was a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, did I miss this?
Yeah.
Shit, I'm going to have to look.
I'll find the article.
Basically, do we think that they take the momentum, as they did a little bit from the pandemic, do they take that momentum now and then put it into gender rights? Is that where we think that's going to go?
So from the 11th of September, this is from The Australian, here you go. Opposition Indigenous Australians spokeswoman Jacinta Price is pushing back against the transgender movement and its impact on children. There you go, there's the dog whistle. Will be amongst her next priorities after the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum, 11th of September.
Right. Oh, I can't wait for that. And to be clear, that's going to have, like, there'll be US donors, because that's a massive issue in the US at the moment. Like, the right wing of politics are pushing the gender agenda. You know, like that's one of the Republicans' key focuses for some reason. So I do wonder whether, organisations like Advance Australia, if they decide that they're going to take an issue with that, whether they get a bunch of money pumped in from overseas, how that works, I don't know. But that's concerning. That's terrifying.
Yep. Yeah. It's going to be fucking disgusting. But anyway, I just hope, I think we should just be hounding the absolute shit out of Peter Dutton for the rest of his days to be doing great things for Indigenous people.
No, but like I would love that. I would love that.
After all this,
we are
don't
all
even
going,
let the man sleep.
We are all going to forget about this in 5 minutes, and the Indigenous community is just going to be as bad off now as they were before. Nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
No additional money is going to be spent. Nothing's going to happen because they don't care. They never cared.
Allegedly, what they're going to do is not spend more money, but they're going to try and reduce waste, which is a classic liberal sort of line,
yeah, of course.
conservative
it's like,
line.
Let's try to do more with less.
And that was another point that was bludgeoned throughout the whole campaign was that, we're actually spending $35 billion, and people were just throwing numbers out there. Like
it reminds me of the NHS bus. We're going to save $50 bajillion a day for the NHS, right, during Brexit.
Yeah, like they were just throwing numbers out there, and everyone was going, "Oh, well, it's obviously lots of waste." And again, this contributed to that whole like the lack of trust in government. It was like, "Oh, they're just wasting money," and like what the NIAA is wasting money. Never mind, it's been there. It's
government, of course, they're wasting money. Yeah. Everything's being wasted everywhere. Doesn't mean we can't do some good along the way.
So yeah, I mean, allegedly, this is where Dutton's focus will be, from what I've read. But as you said, I suspect there'll be a few referrals, there'll be a few committees. And
we will forget about this in 6 months. It'll be completely gone.
Yeah. Well, it's just where my encouragement is we shouldn't do that and do our best to not do that. Constantly hound the fucker.
Before we move on to the United States, do we have any last thoughts on The Voice?
Just makes me sad.
I'm just deeply ashamed of our country.
Yeah.
More than usual.
Like I figured we would lose, but to get so walloped is disappointing because it shows like we've got a long, long way to go. And I don't know how you could sit up there like Lydia Thorpe, like Jacinta Price, like Warren Mundine, and say that you're happy or that you're proud of the result or this is what you've been working for a year. And it's like, okay, great. We're back to square one. Like we established that the status quo for Indigenous communities was not acceptable. And we're right back there and nothing's changed. And it's like, cool. Great. Like now what?
Guys, I don't think we solved it.
No.
We started this
definitely not
to be the three white guys who solved it. No, we didn't do it. Who could have foreseen that?
Well, speaking of not solving it, the US House, the Republicans in the US House have nominated Jim Jordan for Speaker on a 10-day after 10 days of deadlock.
Yeah, so it was. So as we talked about last,
like a real person,
Jim Jordan.
Yeah, just like his name's Jim Jordan. Yeah,
J squared.
Yeah,
it's like
Adam guy.
He replaces Jordan Jimson.
Yep. John Jackson.
Steve Whiteman. So
Jack
Johnson. Hey, don't bring Jack Johnson into this. So as we talked about, Kevin McCarthy was thoroughly defenestrated from his job as Speaker of the House last week, and already within a week, he said, I'm going to go quietly. I'm not going to contest it. And then like within a week, there were already rumblings of like Republican operatives saying like, how could we get Kevin McCarthy back into the seat? And he's like, well, if elected, I would happily stand if I was chosen. It's like, shut up, Kevin, get out of here.
Maybe if we vote for him 16 times.
He's such a cuck that after all that 15 votes and then getting kicked out by his caucus, is going to go, I could give it another Raz.
It's pretty great. 15 times and like agreeing to the condition that it would be really easy to shit can him.
Just you're such a cuck, Kevin.
So funny.
Anyway, they were thinking of, the Republicans were thinking of nominating Steve Scalise, who, to explain the difference between Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, was that like Steve Scalise was a far right.
Why are they both alliterative? I
don't know. That's a good question.
Anyway. They make good Marvel heroes, like Peter Parker, Wade Wilson,
maybe villains.
Keep going. Sorry.
So Steve Scalise is like a far right conservative who, believes in Donald Trump's lie that he won the election. And Jim Jordan is a far right conservative white guy who believes that Donald Trump is the rightful winner of the last election. And he's a white supremacist. So that's the main difference between the two. Basically, he called himself David Duke without
feature.
the David Duke without the baggage. David Duke, former leader of the KKK.
Oh, because that's the issue with David Duke. It was
the baggage.
It was all the baggage,
and not the virulent racism.
Not the cult of the cult of racists that he represented.
So they've been deadlocked for the last 10 days. They did have Steve Scalise up. They couldn't get enough of a majority around him, and so they've gone to the next best thing, which is Jim Jordan. So kind of terrifying if either of these guys get up. Like the Republicans they're just making a bunch of scary decisions. They're in their like woo girl phase where they're just choosing all the wrong men. You know what I mean? Like, I think they really need to like settle down, make some better decisions.
The house has a terrible taste in men.
The house has absolutely has daddy issues.
Got to stop picking. Got to stop picking the.
You got to stop picking unavailable men.
Will this mean that they can pass the next budget spending bill, etc., to stop the government shutting down?
Well, here's the thing: is that
can they stop the government shutting down for another Liz Truss?
The Freedom Caucus and the bunch of far right sort of sociopaths led by Matt Gaetz, fan of teenage girls, Matthew Gaetz, will like it depends on whether they get on board. If they get on board, then he should safely have enough votes to, keep moving stuff through. But that group of whatever it is, 8 House Republicans, are not interested in any more continuing resolutions or moving stuff. They want a government shutdown. So unless some sort of deal is reached with them in order to avoid that, like you're just going to have the same problem playing out again and again every 45 days. I don't see Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise having another continuing resolution, pissing off his caucus, and then like voting with the Democrats to like keep things moving. I just don't see it happening. So it's bad.
Great for the world economy.
Yeah.
And
is it?
I love that. See, to all the
I was going to say that I don't understand the funny money, but that didn't sound like it would be good for the world economy.
To all the people that say that there's a new world order and that there's a bunch of Illuminati behind the scenes pulling the strings, keeping everything super organized, running the world as they wanted to, just look at the major deliberative body in the largest economy in the world is unable to run themselves and find their arsehole with both hands and a flashlight. Like, that is the level of competence that we're talking about here, okay? So for all you conspiracy theorists, this is how things are working when they're running optimally. It's just people falling arse over ball bag, continuing resolutions 45 days at a time. This is the level of competence in our leaders. So I just think about it for a sec.
That's such a weird expression. Hang on, both hands and a flashlight to find your asshole.
Yeah.
Are you holding the flashlight in one of those hands?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Or because otherwise I don't see how the flashlight would be useful if both hands are doing something else. I don't think I could pull that off if I didn't know where my butthole was.
Sometimes you've just got to experiment and find out, if it is true.
I shouldn't knock it till I've tried it. You're right.
Speaking of, trying something new, the New Zealand people have elected a new government and leader, although they're yet to form an actual government because they'll need some crossbench support. But the national leader, Christopher Luxon, has claimed victory in the New Zealand election, which happened, I think, the same day we had the voice referendum, which was a bit weird.
I think it was yesterday.
That ends the 6 years of the Labour-led government unseating Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. They've got, I guess, they're the party with the largest majority, the Nationals, but they may well need to partner with either one or two other crossbench parties to form a coalition government. That might not get worked out for some time as all the votes are counted to who gets what seats and that kind of thing. But definitely Labor will not be... Labor got smashed. They got destroyed.
Yeah.
It's a case of Jacinta Ardern was definitely the star power in that, and she left in Jan, leaving Chris Hipkins in control. So she left, and it was also a case where Jacinta Ardern was one of those political figures who was very popular abroad, but actually not that popular at home for whatever reason. Like the same as Justin Trudeau and a lot of these other sort of like center-left leaders that make it, onto the world stage for whatever reason. It's just like, it seems like it's a recurring kind of, like Kevin Rudd, right? It's like people internationally go, he's great. And then the people who work with him go, actually, he's kind of an asshole.
He's a psychopath.
He yelled at me in Mandarin for 45 minutes and I don't know what he was saying. So, yeah, I mean, granted, it is a centre-right party. We're not generally a fan of centre-right parties here at Unnatural Selection, but in all fairness, a New Zealand centre-right party is probably like a centre-left party here in Australia. So I think it evens out. I mean, there was some talk about, public service cuts and a crackdown on crime and classic sort of like centre-right.
I thought you were about to throw out something crazy. It's just like, they're probably more like a centre-left party here. I mean, there was some talks about like rounding up all the teenagers, it's like some kind of crazy thing.
I'm glad you said teenagers because I felt that sentence was going in an especially dark direction for the end of the podcast. So yeah, it's like. Yeah, Labor's obviously not going to be able to form a government, and so we'll see. This Christopher Luxon guy seems as though he's a bit charismatic. I wonder if that translates to actual, because New Zealand, like a lot of modern Western economies post-COVID, is really struggling with complicated cost of living, inflation.
The old Aussie lives.
How to put together a sort of framework for economic growth in an economy that's very mature and established, and not, sort of increasing in size in terms of population necessarily overly fast. So, yeah, same thing happening in Britain, same thing happening in New Zealand and a lot of other Western nations, Canada. Like, we're all dealing with these problems. So,
did you know?
I'm concerned because I don't think you can really cut your way. I don't think you can austerity your way to growth, which it sounds like that's what he's wanting to do. But I don't know. Maybe better fiscal management will be good long term. I don't know. It's hard to say at this stage.
Well, Christopher Luxon, he used to sell deodorant and ice cream, and he ran an airline, and it was a top corporate executive who relished turnaround jobs for flagging businesses. So maybe he does have what it takes. So this is his first term in Parliament, so he's relatively untested from a leadership and politics perspective.
Wow, what a journey.
That's a jump.
How do you go from like selling... As in selling deodorant, is it what was he chairman of the board, or did he work in like the body shop?
Yeah. It does make it sound like he's selling sticks of Revlon at the 7-Eleven. The way you said
it's it's just who goes from working in Priceline and then suddenly you're like the CEO of Air New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's the plot of King Ralph. Basically, someone died and now he's the CEO.
Yeah, he's pledging tax cuts, crime crackdowns, and drastic slashes to government spending.
I mean, that's classic sort of conservative. Like centre-right stuff, right?
Yeah. Might work, might not. Depends on sort of how it all goes. Because, I mean, the thing with Australia is we just keep adding more people to our population, which is how we sort of stay out of recession somehow.
Well, we are technically in a we are in a per capita recession at the moment, which basically means the amount of GDP, gross domestic product, right, the amount of buying and spending each one of us is doing has decreased, right? So, and it is less than than what it was the year before. It's just that the amount of people that have come into the country has substantively increased. So it's like the amount per person that is buying and selling has decreased, but we've got more people, so it's maintaining sort of more or less steady on the books, if that makes sense. So we are already technically in a recession, but we'll see if that ends up translating into a full-blown, like, big boy recession by the end of the year. We'll see.
Yeah. We'll see what happens in New Zealand. Time will tell. And I guess it'll be interesting to sort of see some of these policies he's talked about. It'll be interesting who he partners with will probably determine a lot of how this stuff plays out in terms of some of the policies he's promised, because, you can very well say we're going to do X, Y, Z, but if you have to partner with someone who says they're doing A, B,
Who's
C...
an extremist,
how do you sort of come together and have a policy platform that isn't watered down or, ineffective?
Well, if you're...
we'll see.
If you're Julia Gillard, then you end up with a carbon tax. That's what ends up happening.
Ah, yes.
Which seems like a pretty good idea, doesn't it now, folks? Not such a terrible idea to have a carbon tax right about now as the world burns.
Yeah,
on that
think
note,
of all the money we could be making.
George, it's raining today outside in Melbourne. How can there be...
I found a snowball, so there's no way that it's global warming. You fucking idiot. Liberal cuck. On that note, we have been... Let me finish this show. We have been, we are, and we always will be Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our Salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. Make sure you follow us on all the social medias that have, do, or ever will exist at Unnatural Show. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and mother flippin' TikTok. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter at George Tsipos.
You can follow me on Twitter at Tom D. Heath.
You can follow me down to the Government Audit Office, where they'll definitely be looking at Indigenous spending and definitely making real change that will change the world.
Improve people's lives. Yep, they're onto it.
All of the above. It's going to happen.
Yeah. You know how we've been doing that for the last 40 years and it hasn't done anything? It's actually gotten worse in recent years. We're just going to do more of that.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. The problem was we didn't do it enough.
You know what they say? If you keep trying the same thing over and over again with the same result, that's great.
That's sane.
That's totally
That's
sane.
what they say.
Yep.
Totally sane.
That's the saying. I think.
Did we? What was the user that?
OG butt stuff.
OG butt stuff. I hope we changed OG butt stuff's life.
We did not.
They ended on a transphobic joke. So no, I think let's cool username aside, into the dickhead pile. I
had such high hopes for OG butt stuff. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Came in strong.
Came in hot.
Came in strong with a give me a good chuckle. But no. But bow. Bin boy.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.